Welcome back, everybody, to the Deep Dive. This time, we're looking into Jaiprakash Power Ventures Ltd, or JPVL for short.
Oh, right.
You sent over their standalone and consolidated financial results
Right.
for the quarter and 9 months that ended December 31st, 2024.
Okay.
We've got those independent auditor reports, which can be a little tough to go through sometimes,
Yes, they can be.
and also, a list of your own questions about this whole thing.
Right.
So are we ready to kind of break all of this down and figure out how JPVL is actually performing?
Absolutely. I think that's a great idea. I think we can uncover the highlights. And also, what are some of the potential risks
Right.
that anyone listening needs to know about?
Okay, let's start with just like the very basics. Did JPVL make money this quarter?
They did.
Okay.
Both the standalone and the consolidated reports show a net profit after tax of ours, 12,668 lakhs.
Okay.
So now the question is that good news or is that a warning sign?
Right.
So we'll need to compare it to their past performance.
Yeah. Okay, so let's look at last quarter, ending September 30th, 2024. Their standalone profit was 18,211 lakhs.
Okay.
It's a pretty big drop.
Yeah, it is. And also, if we look at the same quarter last year, ending December 31st, 2023, they recorded a standalone profit of our 17,285 lakhs.
Okay.
So they're slightly up compared to last year, but down from last quarter.
Okay. So like a mixed bag.
Exactly.
But profit isn't the whole story, right?
No.
What else should we be considering here to really understand, how they're actually doing?
I think you need to look at the bigger picture of the entire power sector
Okay.
and where JPVL fits in.
Right.
And so if you look at their business, they have a few different operations. So power, coal, sand mining.
Uh-huh.
And then they have a category that's just others.
Interesting.
And so, the performance of each of these segments is going to add up to that overall profit number.
Yeah, okay. And speaking of their different segments, I saw something that was kind of interesting in these notes.
Okay.
They mentioned water availability impacting the Vishnuprayag hydroelectric plant's power generation.
Okay.
So what does that mean for their revenue?
So that's a really good question, and it's an important point.
Okay.
Hydroelectric power generation is very seasonal.
Okay.
And so for the Vishnuprayag plant, most of their power is actually generated in the first half of the fiscal year,
Okay.
when the water levels are much higher.
Interesting.
Usually somewhere between 75% to 80% of their annual generation comes from that period.
Oh, wow. Okay, so their hydropower revenue is not very consistent then throughout the year.
Yeah, exactly.
It is-
Something to keep in mind.
Yeah, definitely something to watch out for.
Now, for their thermal power plants,
Okay.
JBTPP and JNSTPP revenue works a little bit differently.
Okay.
And the way it works is they have something called a multi-year tariff,
Okay.
which basically means there's a set price that they're allowed to charge for the electricity.
Okay.
And this tariff covered them from 2019-20 to 2023-24.
Okay, but then now they need a new tariff, right?
Correct.
For 2024, 25 to 2028, 29, and that hasn't been finalized yet.
Exactly. That's a great point.
Okay, so that seems like it could cause some, instability in their future revenue.
Yeah, that's definitely a key point. And on top of that, even the revenue for Vishnuprayag is based on a provisional tariff,
Oh.
which means it could change
Mm.
after they do like a final assessment. So
Right.
there's a bit of a question mark
Right.
hanging over all those revenue figures.
Okay, so we've got some potential volatility in the revenue stream.
Yes.
Definitely something to keep our eye on. But hey, they're still reporting a profit.
Right.
So that's got to be a good sign, right?
Well, before we get too excited,
Okay.
there is something very important to highlight in both the standalone and consolidated financial reports.
Okay.
And that is that they have what are called qualified conclusions from the auditors.
Qualified conclusions, that doesn't sound too good.
It doesn't.
What are they worried about, and how does that affect how I should be understanding this profit?
So basically what it means is the auditors have some reservations.
About specific parts of the financial statements.
Okay.
And so in JPVL's case, one of the big concerns is a corporate guarantee of USD 1,500 lakhs
Okay.
that they gave to Jaiprakash Associates Limited,
Okay.
or JAL.
JAL, didn't they have some financial trouble recently?
They did.
Yeah.
JAL is currently going through a corporate insolvency resolution process,
Okay.
and that's why the auditors are concerned.
Hmm.
JPVL hasn't set aside any money or what they call a provision to cover this guarantee
Okay.
if JAL can't pay up.
So there's a chance JPVL might be on the hook for that USD 1,500 lakhs.
Exactly.
Oh, that's a huge potential liability.
That's right. It's not the only issue either.
Oh, really?
There's also an advance payment of
Okay.
AX 4,281 lakhs that JPVL made to JAL, again, with no provision made.
Wow, okay.
And JPVL says they've filed claims to get this money back, but it's uncertain if they'll be successful.
So really, those qualified conclusions are kind of a big deal. It's like the auditors are saying, hey, this profit might look good on paper, but watch out. Exactly. These are big red flags for investors.
Right.
They show that there might be some, hidden financial vulnerabilities that aren't fully reflected in that profit number.
Okay. All right. So we've looked at their overall performance and we've uncovered some risks.
Yeah.
Let's look now at the notes to the financial statements.
Okay.
What other interesting details are sort of hidden in there?
There's definitely a few things worth highlighting. One particularly dramatic situation is going on with Uttar Pradesh Power Corporation Ltd, or UPPCL.
What's happening with them?
So they're claiming that Jaiprakash Power was overpaid and want a pretty big sum of money back.
How much are we talking here?
45,635 lakhs to be exact, including carrying costs.
Wow. So what does Jaiprakash Power have to say about that?
So Jaiprakash Power is not backing down. They are arguing that UPPCL's actions aren't in line with their power purchase agreement, or PPA. The dispute actually went to the Uttar Pradesh Electricity Regulatory Commission, or UPERFING.
So who won that round?
So UPERSE sided with UPPCL and upheld the recovery of the overpayment. However, Jaiprakash Power has appealed the decision, and it's now waiting for a ruling from the Appellate Tribunal for Electricity, or APTL.
So it's still kind of ongoing then?
Yes, it is. And in the meantime, UPPCL has withheld 32,672 lakhs from Jaiprakash Power.
Wow.
But Jaiprakash Power says they expect to recover this money with interest, but it all depends on the outcome of that appeal.
Okay, so basically until this whole court case is settled, a good chunk of JPVL's money is frozen.
That's correct. And that's going to hurt their cash flow.
Yeah, that makes sense. And are there any other contingencies we should be thinking about?
So there are a few other things to mention. There's some entry tax issues related to their Nigri SDPP unit. And we're talking about a potential liability here of 10,871 lakhs plus interest. And JPVL is hoping to get an exemption, but that's still pending.
Okay, so more potential cost looming.
Right. And then finally, there's a note about pending confirmations and reconciliations for various balances. So things like borrowings, receivables, and payables.
So basically, some of their financial figures might need to be adjusted once everything's kind of straightened out?
That's right.
Okay.
They attribute this to a large volume of transactions. And they say they're trying to improve their internal controls. They think these pending confirmations won't have a major impact, but it's something to keep in mind.
Okay, so those are contingencies and reconciliation issues.
Right.
But now I'm really curious about this sand mining thing in Andhra Pradesh.
Oh, yeah.
That sounds interesting.
It's a whole saga. So back in May 2021, Jaiprakash Power entered into a 2-year contract with the Director of Mines and Geology, or DMG. And this allowed them to extract sand from specific areas.
Okay, so they got into the sand mining business.
Right.
Did they actually do the mining themselves?
Actually, no. They subcontracted those contracts. And the subcontractor had to provide bank guarantees of ours 12,000 lakhs to the DMG.
So JPVL wasn't like directly involved in actually, getting the sand out and selling it?
No, not directly. So when that 2-year contract ended in May 2023, the DMG allowed JPVL to continue selling their remaining stock until November 2023. And then after that, any unsold stock was taken over by the DMG. And they actually received a no-due certificate.
Okay, so it sounds pretty straightforward so far. What's the problem?
Here's the problem. During the 9 months leading up to December 2024, JPVL was hit with show-cause demand notices totaling Rs. 179,367 lakhs.
Okay, that's a big difference. What are they being accused of?
The notices allege illegal extraction, storage, transportation, and sale of sand.
Yikes. Okay, what's JPVL's response to these pretty serious accusations?
They're claiming the subcontractor is responsible for any wrongdoing. They point out that the DMG released the bank guarantees and issued that no-due certificate. They've disputed the notices, highlighting that the DMG inspections were conducted long after the contracts expired. And a whole other agency had taken over the sand mining operations.
So basically they're saying they didn't do anything wrong and it's the subcontractor's fault.
Exactly. They insist they have a strong legal defense. and don't think they'll be held liable, but it's definitely something to watch.
Yeah.
The sand mining saga
Yeah.
could have huge financial implications if it doesn't go their way.
All right, we've got this whole sand mining drama unfolding. What else should we be aware of?
So one more thing. The Securities and Exchange Board of India, or SEBI,
Oh.
conducted an investigation into JPVL.
Okay, SEBI investigation never really brings good news. What did they find?
So SEBI focused on a few different issues, including their compliance with accounting standards.
Okay.
They had concerns about the valuation of that corporate guarantee we were talking about,
Right.
the impairment of financial assets, and related party transactions.
Okay, and so are they fighting this penalty?
They are. They're evaluating the impact and considering an appeal.
Okay, so fighting that penalty is going to take away from their resources for other things, like these struggling subsidiaries.
Yeah, you're right. That's a good point. Should talk about that next.
Yeah.
The auditors raised some serious concerns about the ability of 3 of JPVL subsidiaries to continue operating.
You mean that going concern thing?
Yes.
Can you explain what that means and why it's a problem?
Of course, going concern is basically an assumption in accounting that a company is expected to keep operating for the foreseeable future.
Okay.
So when auditors question a company's going concern status, it's a sign that they have doubts about the company's ability to stay in business.
Okay, so which subsidiaries are they worried about?
So the 3 in question are JP Arunachal Power Limited,
Good.
JP Meghalaya Power Limited,
Okay.
and Sangam Power Generation Company Limited.
Okay, we've named the subsidiaries, but what exactly are the problems that they're facing? Why are there doubts about them being able to continue operating?
So each subsidiary is kind of dealing with its own issues.
Okay.
JP Arunachal Power Limited, or JAPL, has seen a significant erosion of its net worth,
Okay.
which means its liabilities are greater than its assets.
Right.
And so this raises questions about their financial stability.
Yeah.
The auditors noted that JPL is very reliant on support from its holding company, which is JPVL, to keep operating.
So they're in a pretty precarious position then.
They are. What about JP Meghalaya Power Limited,
Yeah, so what about them?
or JMPL?
Okay.
They're also in a tough spot.
Okay.
They've accumulated losses that have wiped out more than half of their net worth.
Wow.
And just like JPL, they're heavily reliant on JPVL for their daily operations.
Wow, so 2 subsidiaries struggling to stay afloat.
Right.
What about the third one, Sangam Power Generation Company Limited?
Yes, Sangam Power Generation Company Limited, or SPGCL,
Okay.
is also facing some challenges. They've incurred big losses,
Oh.
and their net worth has been eroded. And to add to their problems,
Oh.
they have a major claim pending against UPPCL, which is currently before the Supreme Court.
Oh, so it's kind of a waiting game for them while this legal battle plays out.
It is. So this all sounds pretty bad.
Yeah, it does.
Does the auditor's report offer any hope for these subsidiaries?
Right.
So the report does highlight these uncertainties,
Okay.
but it's important to point out that the financial statements for all 3 subsidiaries were prepared on a going concern basis.
Okay.
So that means that the management of these subsidiaries believes they can overcome these challenges.
So they have a plan, but the plan's success is definitely uncertain.
Exactly.
We'll have to watch and see how it plays out.
Yeah, and with that,
Okay.
I think we've covered a lot in this first part
Yeah.
of our deep dive into JPVL's Q3 FY25 financials. We've seen some positive results,
Right.
but also uncovered a whole bunch of potential risks and uncertainties.
Yeah. It's definitely a mixed bag, and it shows you can't just look at, one number like the profit to really understand what's going on.
Exactly. Right. But we're not done yet. In the next part of our deep dive, we're going to tackle your specific questions,
Right.
which I think will spark some interesting discussion.
Stay tuned, everybody. We'll be back in just a minute to continue our journey into JPVL's financial landscape. Okay, so we're back and ready to tackle your questions about JPVL's Q3 FY25 performance.
Sounds good. Let's jump in.
Okay, so first up, let's go back to revenue growth. What were some of the key factors that really drove JPVL's revenue this quarter?
So, they've got this diverse mix of revenue streams, right?
Right.
We've got power generation, coal sand, mining, those other activities. So to really understand what's driving those numbers, I think we got to look at the consolidated figures.
Yeah, okay, so what does that tell us?
So for this quarter, the consolidated revenue reached Rs 114,017 lakhs.
Yeah.
And the vast majority of that came from their power segment,
Got my.
Rs 114,033 lakhs.
Wow, okay, so power generation is clearly their main source of revenue.
It is.
But we talked about how their hydropower plant, is really tied to water availability. And this quarter is in the second half of the fiscal year when water levels are typically lower.
Yeah, exactly. So while, power is, the biggest chunk of their revenue, we can't assume that all of this is just from strong hydropower generation.
Right, right.
We got to think about their thermal power plants,
Okay.
JBTPP and JNSTPP,
Uh-huh.
and then also their coal and sand mining operations.
Right. So it's really a mix of things driving that revenue number.
It is.
Okay, so let's talk about profitability. Did they actually manage to maintain their margins, or did they see any slippage this quarter?
So to understand their profitability, I think we need to look at their operating margins.
Okay.
And a healthy operating margin tells us they're controlling their costs
Oh.
and making money from their core business operations.
Okay, so what do their operating margins actually look like?
So their consolidated operating profit before finance charges, depreciation, amortization, exceptional items, and tax
Okay.
came in at Rs 40,642 lakhs for the quarter.
Okay, but how does that compare to their past performance? Is that a good number or a bad number?
You're right. We need some context. So last quarter, their operating profit was Rs 46,510 lakhs.
Okay.
And the same quarter last year was Rs 60,062 lakhs.
Oh, so their operating profit has declined compared to both last quarter and the same quarter last year.
Yeah.
That's right. Okay, that's a little worrying, isn't it?
It is a little bit. It suggests that JPVL might be, facing some cost pressure or experiencing a squeeze on their margins. And so, this is definitely something to watch for as an investor.
Yeah.
And, we need to see if they can reverse this trend going forward.
Okay, so declining profitability, definitely something to keep an eye on.
Yeah.
What about their debt situation? Did they manage to pay down any debt this quarter, or did it increase?
So debt management is super important
Yeah.
when you're looking at a company's financial health. Unfortunately, these quarterly reports don't really give us specific numbers on their debt levels
Okay.
for this particular period. However, the notes to the financials do have some clues about some debt-related issues.
Okay, what kind of issues?
So remember those contingent liabilities we talked about?
Related to JAL?
Yeah, with JAL.
Right.
The corporate guarantee and the advance payment.
Uh-huh.
Those are definitely part of their debt picture.
Okay.
Because they're potential liabilities that could really hurt their financial stability if they have to actually pay those.
Right. It's like a big question mark hanging over their heads.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Now let's look at their main business power generation.
Okay.
We know their hydropower plant is very tied to water availability.
Right.
So how did their power generation capacity and plant performance actually play into the financial results this quarter?
Well, we know that their Vishnuprayak HEP typically makes most of its power in the first half of the year. And so since Q3 is the second half of the year, it makes sense that their power generation from that plant was lower this quarter.
You're right. We don't have exact power generation numbers for each plant,
Okay.
but it's a pretty safe bet that the lower water levels probably led to less power generation overall.
Right. And that, of course, would mean less revenue from selling that power.
Exactly. And don't forget those tariffs for the thermal power plants.
JBTPP and JNSTPP.
Right. JBTPP and JNSTPP are still kind of up in the air.
Right.
So there's even more uncertainty about their future revenue.
It's like all these different pieces are connected.
They are.
Lower hydropower generation, uncertainty around the thermal power tariffs. It's a pretty complicated situation.
It is. It really highlights how challenging this is for JPVL.
Okay, so let's talk about risks. What are the biggest risks JPVL is facing as they go into the next quarter?
So I think we've identified a few.
Yeah, quite a few.
We've got those contingent liabilities,
Uh-huh.
ongoing legal battles,
Right.
accounting irregularities.
From SEBI.
Yeah, from SEBI.
Uh-huh.
And their subsidiaries are struggling to stay afloat.
Right. Where do we even begin?
I think you've summarized it well. Those are the main things investors need to think about. So let's look at them one by one.
Okay, that sounds a little less overwhelming.
Okay.
Let's start with the contingent liabilities related to JAL.
Okay, so those are a major concern
Okay.
because they haven't set aside any money for them.
Right.
We don't know exactly how much it's going to cost them, but it could be a lot,
Yeah.
and it could really hurt their financial situation.
And then we've got those legal battles,
Yeah,
both with UPPCL and that whole sand mining thing.
exactly. And those are taking up time and money.
Right.
And, we don't know how those are going to end up either.
Yeah, and then, of course, those struggling subsidiaries, those aren't just going to magically disappear.
Yeah, you're right. JAPL, JMPL, and SPGCL are all facing their own problems. And those problems are going to affect JPVL
Right.
overall.
So it's like a triple whammy.
It-
So given all these problems, how does JPVL's Q3 performance measure up to, what they were expecting for the fiscal year?
So that's tough to say for sure because we don't really know
Right.
what their internal projections were.
Mm,
But I think it's safe to say that, facing a SEBI investigation, legal battles, and struggling subsidiaries wasn't part of the plan.
yeah, I would agree with that.
Yeah.
So were there any surprises in these financial statements? Anything that really stood out to you?
Yeah, those qualified conclusions from the auditors were definitely interesting.
Yeah.
It's not common for a company to report a profit while the auditors are saying, hey, we're not so sure about these numbers.
Yeah, and all those show cause notices for the sand mining.
Right out of the blue.
Yeah, that makes you wonder what else is going on.
Yeah, you've got a good point. I think these unexpected things
Yeah.
really show why it's so important to dig into the details and not just take everything at face value.
Yeah. Okay, so speaking of things not always being what they seem, there's a lot of talk these days about, sustainability and renewable energy. Are those things playing a role in JPVL's financial outlook? Are they investing in a greener future?
So they do have that Vishnupurag hydroelectric plant, which
Oh,
is
yeah.
renewable energy.
Right.
But these documents don't really say anything about new investments in that area.
Okay, so it doesn't seem like sustainability is like a big factor in their financials right now.
Yeah, at least not based on what we see here.
Right.
It's possible they have plans, but we don't see anything in these reports.
Okay, let's talk about cash flow. What's JPVL's cash flow looking like for Q3 FY25? Are they making enough money to cover their expenses and investments?
That's a really important question.
Yeah.
But unfortunately, we don't have a detailed cash flow statement.
Okay.
So we can't give a definitive answer for this quarter.
Okay, that's a shame. Cash flow is like the lifeblood of a company.
It is, but we can look at other things in the reports to get some clues.
Okay, like,
So think back to those contingent liabilities related to JAL.
right.
If they actually have to pay those,
Right.
that could wipe out a lot of their cash reserves.
Right. And what about those lawsuits? Could those be affecting their cash flow too?
Yeah, potentially. We know UPPCL is withholding a good chunk of money from them,
Right.
and that could make it hard for them to pay their bills.
And what about those pending confirmations and reconciliations?
Yeah, good point.
Yeah.
Those could also impact their cash flow if those adjustments change things.
Right. It's another layer of uncertainty.
It is. So while we don't have all the details,
Right.
there are definitely some warning signs.
That their cash might be tight.
Yeah, exactly. Something to watch closely.
Okay, so we don't have the full picture of their cash flow, but there are some red flags there.
Definitely.
Okay, so let's move on to their cost structure.
Yeah.
Can we actually break down the major costs that are affecting their bottom line this quarter?
Yeah, definitely. So if you look at the consolidated statement, you can see pretty clearly that their biggest expense is cost of material and operation expenses.
Okay, how much was that?
It came in at ours, 78,276 lakhs for the quarter.
Wow, that's a lot.
It is. And then right behind that, we've got finance costs at ours, 9,742 lakhs.
Okay,
And then depreciation and amortization expenses at ours, 11,649 lakhs.
so those three are the big ones.
Yeah, those are the main culprits hurting their profits.
And if we look at their different business segments, is there one that's particularly, costly?
Yeah, so if you look at that breakdown, the power segment is definitely where they're spending the most,
Okay,
which makes sense.
right, because that's their main business.
Exactly.
Okay, so how about the bigger picture of the power sector? How did market conditions maybe influence JPVL's financials this quarter?
So that's something to think about because the power sector is always changing.
Right.
You've got fluctuating demand, regulatory changes, new energy sources coming in,
Yeah.
and all those things can impact a power company's performance.
So it'd be helpful to know, like, what was going on in the power sector, during this specific quarter.
It would, but unfortunately, these reports don't give us any details about that.
Oh, okay. So we can't really say how those external factors might have played a role.
Yeah, that's right. But we can definitely keep an eye out for, news or industry reports.
Right.
That can give us more context.
Right. Okay, so looking ahead, what strategic initiatives or investments is JPVL focusing on in the near future? Are they making any moves to, like, strengthen their position or tackle these challenges we've been discussing?
So that's a big question investors are always asking.
Right.
But these financial statements are really focused on the past quarter,
Okay.
and they don't give us a lot of information about their future plans.
Then no crystal ball.
No crystal ball, but we can make some guesses.
Okay, I like guessing. What do you think?
So I think addressing those contingent liabilities
Right.
related to JAL is going to be a big priority.
Right.
They're going to have to figure out how to deal with those potential losses and protect their finances.
So, like, maybe negotiations or legal action or setting aside some cash.
Yeah, exactly. And then those legal battles.
Right.
They're going to have to try to resolve those.
With UPPCL and the sand mining.
Yep. And they can't forget about their subsidiaries.
Yeah.
They got to figure out how to stabilize JMPL and SPGCL
Right.
and get them back on track.
So maybe put in more money, restructure things, or even sell off some assets.
Right, exactly.
So they have their work cut out for them.
They do.
Okay, so let's wrap this part of our discussion up by talking about what investors should be watching as we head into Q4 FY25. What are the key things that will tell us, if they're heading in the right direction or not?
Okay, so I think the first thing to watch is what happens with those contingent liabilities.
Okay.
Are they going to have to pay a bunch of money?
Right.
Can they work out a deal?
Right.
Those are the big questions.
Okay, well.
Any progress on those legal battles?
Okay.
Will those drag on, or will we see some resolution?
And then, of course, we got to keep watching their subsidiaries.
Right. Are they going to get better or worse?
Exactly. And then beyond those specific things, investors will be looking at their operating margins, their cash flow, and their debt levels.
Right. Those are important for any company.
They are. And then, it'll be interesting to see if they announce any new strategies or investments in the next quarter.
Okay, so it sounds like there are still a lot of unknowns.
There are, but, hopefully this deep dive has given you some tools to make your own assessment.
Right. We've looked at the good and the bad. Now it's time for our final takeaway and a question to leave you with.
Okay.
Stick with us. We'll be back in just a minute. Okay, so we're back for our final thoughts on Jaiprakash Power Ventures Ltd.
This deep dive has really shown us that a company's financials aren't always what they seem.
Yeah, for sure. JPVL reported a profit, which, sounds pretty good at first glance.
Right.
But then we dug a little deeper and we found all those potential risks and uncertainties. Exactly. Those contingent liabilities, the legal battles, and the financial health of those subsidiaries.
Right.
All things investors need to really think about.
Yeah, it's a good reminder that you can't just look at one number like the profit to really understand what's going on.
Exactly. So the big question is, do the positives outweigh the negatives here?
Right.
Is JPVL a risky bet, or is there potential?
What do you think?
Well, that's the million-dollar question, and there's no easy answer. It really depends on, your own personal risk tolerance, what your goals are, and how you weigh the potential gains against the potential losses.
Right.
JPVL could do really well, but there's also a chance things could go wrong.
It sounds like this is a company that requires a lot of research and careful thinking before making any investment decisions.
Yeah, I would agree with that. There are a lot of moving pieces here, and it's important to understand the risks.
So what's the one big takeaway you want our listeners to remember from today?
I think the biggest takeaway is that, analyzing a company's financials is like peeling back the layers of an onion. There's always more to uncover, and you can't just look at the surface. You really got to dig deep to understand the company's true financial health and their potential for success.
That's a great analogy. And on that note, I think we should leave our listeners with one final thought to ponder.
Okay.
So after diving deep into JPVL's financials with us today, what do you think about their future?
Yeah, do you think they can overcome these challenges and succeed, or are the risks just too big?
Yeah, there's no right or wrong answer.
Yeah.
We've given you the information. Now it's your turn to decide what you think.
We hope this deep dive has given you what you need to really assess their future.
And we always encourage our listeners to do their own research on companies that they're interested in.
Right. And remember, the world of finance is always changing.
Yeah.
It's important to stay informed and to ask good questions.
That's all for this deep dive.
See you next time.
We'll see you next time for another exciting exploration of the world of finance.